Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you, Rosario, for the invitation to be here to present our work. It's a pleasure to see so many people interested in the Portuguese styles and especially in the project on the colors. I will start by presenting my co-speakers and myself as well. My name is Susana. I'm a researcher at VicArt, the research unit Glass and Ceramics for the Arts at Nova University in Caparica. I have a background in conservation and restoration, but my work has been mostly focused in the fields of technical art history and archaeometry and studying glaze styles and other glazed ceramic artworks. I am the principal investigator of the ChromAz project, and I have the pleasure to be accompanied by the co-principal investigator, Marcia Villarix. Marcia is an assistant professor and head of conservation department at Nova University, the School of Science and Technology. She is also the director of the research unit VicArt. She works in the field of conservation and restoration of cultural heritage in the area of technical art history and materials degradation. Her motivation for the research is to preserve our material cultural history and enrich the knowledge of our shared past through the history of objects. And finally, we have here today Umberto Veronesi, a member of our team. He's an archaeologist and heritage scientist. He's specialized in the study of pre-modern technologies. His main interests involve glassmaking and metallurgy, particularly in the early modern period. Umberto is currently a research fellow in our project, where he investigates the colors and technology of Portuguese Azulejos through a mixture of scientific analysis and laboratory replication. And I will start presenting our project. So today we will be talking about the colors of azulejos. And we hope that at the end of this presentation, you will be curious to look at tiles from a different point of view. This is a project which is funded by the Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia. We are more or less a year on our project. It has been a year and we still have 2 more years to go. So at this point, we have more questions than answers, and we'll share our questions with you and also the work that we have been doing. But first, let me explain that we are just 3 members of a much larger team of researchers from different institutions and also different areas of expertise. Together, we intend to study and tell the story of the Portuguese style heritage through its colors. And to do that, we designed a 3-fold project, which we will be introducing to you today. We are studying the different color palettes of the Portuguese Azulejo from the second half of the 16th century until the end of the blue and white period in the 18th century. And this information will be combined with the chemical analysis of different colors and shades, which will give us information on the production techniques and the pigments used to produce the tiles in specific places and times. And finally, we are also reconstructing the colors to better understand their production processes. And the recipes will then be published and made available at the end of the project. To understand the evolution of the color palette, we must start at the beginning of the Portuguese production of maiolica. And in the 15th century, this term, maiolica, was used only for luster-decorated ceramics, which were exported from Spain to Italy through the port of Majorca. With time, maiolica became the used designation for all tin glazed ceramics. Italy developed this technology, and soon this white surface, this white tin opacified glaze, was used almost like a canvas as a background to produce beautifully painted objects, just like this plate that we see here. And from Italy, several maiolica masters moved to Spain, to Antwerp, and also to other locations in Europe, and they took their technical knowledge with them, and which spread throughout Europe. The introduction of maiolica in the Iberian Peninsula is attributed to the Italian Francisco Nicoloso Pisano in the first decades of the 16th century. However, by this time, Hispano-Moresque tiles were very much in fashion, and it took several decades for the maiolica technique to completely replace these Hispano-Moresque tiles. We can see here, for instance, this example of the mixed use of maiolica and arista techniques in Pisano's work. Although the white tin glaze technology was also used since the Islamic potters were in the Iberian Peninsula, more or less around the 10th century, the beginnings of the Portuguese production are believed to have taken place during the second half of the 16th century, when ceramists from Antwerp established their workshops in Portugal. And they started to produce this new technique. One of the most important earlier works is retábulo de Nossa Senhora da Vida, currently in the National Tile Museum in Lisbon. Here we can see the typical color palette of Italian and Flemish maiolica, with the brown purple color obtained with manganese, the Naples yellow, which when mixed with iron gives us the orange color, the green obtained with copper oxides, and the well-known cobalt blue. Through time, the color combinations can be observed, and they can be very important for pinpointing production periods, places, workshops, etc. Here, for instance, the painters left out the brown and the purple tones. And the green is also different from the one that we saw in the previous panel. And this green is actually a mixture of yellow and blue. In this case, however, we are looking at a panel where green, yellow, and brown are the main colors, whereas blue can only be seen in very small areas. And this suggests, well, cobalt was extremely expensive, so its absence suggests a period or a buyer with lower economical power. The lesser quality of the painting also suggests a lower quality work. Nevertheless, with this image, we can still imagine the impressive decoration effect of these panels. In the second half of the 17th century, the color palette changes progressively into the exclusive use of the cobalt blue. But before that, there are a set of panels using mainly cobalt and manganese, with only a few details in green. The blue and white period, also known as the master cycle, is often regarded as the golden era of the Portuguese Azulejo. Here, even when we see only cobalt blue, we know that the blue tone is not always the same, and the ways of applying the pigment also are not always the same. So this takes us to the second part of the project, the chemical and morphological analysis of the glaze and its colors. Studying the chemical composition of the colors gives us many important pieces of information regarding the pigments, raw materials, and production methods. Despite the high variety of color tones, the colors are mostly obtained with just a handful of chemical compounds. In this project, more than identifying the chemical composition of each color, we will consider the combinations in each palette, as well as the chronology and provenance. Using this panel as an example, we can see that the painters used copper green, Naples yellow, cobalt blue, and manganese brown. But there are important questions that differ from panel to panel and throughout the centuries, like the other chemical elements that are associated with the cobalt, or the specific recipe of the yellow pigment, or even whether the brown areas and the dark contours are even the same pigment. Preliminary results and the literature review showed us that some of the first productions in the 16th century used a lighter yellow, which is often associated with a variant of the Naples yellow pigment to which tin is added. And this variant is common throughout Europe and has also been identified in Flemish style panels. In the 17th century, a different yellow variant, the Naples yellow pigment with added zinc, seems to have been the most used in Portuguese styles. It is not clear yet if this was Spanish influence, or even why the tile painters added the zinc, why they used this specific variant. We know that it is not a pigment common outside the Iberian Peninsula. We also know that by the end of the 18th century, but not the end, by the 18th century, after the blue and white periods, when the colors are progressively used again, the yellow used was the basic Naples yellow pigment without zinc nor tin. As another example, the green is not always the same. When, where, and why did the tile makers use different greens? We don't know that yet. Their behavior, the pigment's behavior, is distinct. The copper green, which we see here, sorry, here on the left, spreads a lot more and often acts as a flux, causing these bubbles that we see here. Some historical treatises mention the mixture of yellow pigment and copper oxide, but this is yet to be identified in Portuguese styles. On the other hand, we often use the mixture of yellow and blue pigments to obtain green, like here we see in the right, on the right. There is also something to be noted about the cost of these colors and not just the shade of the green, because a mixture that includes cobalt would have been more costly, although, as we see here, with a much better result. There is also a wide variety of cobalt blue tonalities, and this example is easy to spot due to the gray shades of the upper tiles, and this shade is often associated with a lower quality and cheaper product that was used in times and places with less financial stability, if we can say that. But other examples aren't as easy to distinguish, and that's why it's important to perform chemical analysis in association with the color analysis as well. Historical treatises and recipe books are a fundamental part of this study, not only for the recipes, but also for obtaining information on raw materials. For instance, we have here a description of cobalt blue, which is especially interesting. In this treatise from 1301, Abu al-Qasim, a descendant from an important Persian family of potters, describes different cobalt minerals. He talks about cobaltite as a white silver shining, scuturidite, a cobalt nickel arsenide that comes from Europe, and what is likely erythrite, red-colored and highly poisonous because of its high arsenic content. In this description that we saw, the two most important cobalt sources of the time are mentioned. Europe, most likely the cobalt mines in Saxony, in Germany, in Europe, the cobalt mines in Germany became so important that in the early 16th century, transformations occurred to optimize the production process. Before, cobalt was a byproduct of the extraction of silver, but its importance grew to the point of becoming a highly lucrative product as well. And this was probably the source for all the cobalt that we see in our Portuguese tiles. In this engraving, we see businessmen looking at different cobalt mixtures that were sold and used for coloring glass and ceramics. These different mixtures will have slightly different chemical compositions that will aid in distinguishing the painters who use them. So we still have the same pigments, but this type of differences will actually help us, and not only seeing different colors and associating with the colors, but also to distinguish the masters, the workshops, and also maybe chronological periods as well. Unfortunately, there is no Portuguese treatise that we know of documenting the recipes or the production process of our azulejos. And therefore, our final aim is to unveil these secrets by reconstructing a selected group of representative colors. And for that, we use the results from the chemical composition. We will combine them with historical recipes from international treatises and recipe books, and we'll try to get to the colors and to create and to publish a sort of treatise that will become available to everyone in the end. The most important reference for anyone studying Maiolica is Pico Passo's treatise from the mid-16th century. This is a very, very important treatise. And this is an example of a recipe for yellow. This is a Naples yellow. He gives us three different proportions for the ingredients, which are lead, antimony, and iron scales. In Portuguese tiles, this would actually be an orange and not a yellow, because we see that in our tiles, when we have iron associated with the yellow, it's usually the orange color. Pico Passo also tells us that the best source for the iron scales is the anchors of ships. But there is a lot of information that we don't have, and therefore we need to test it ourselves. So we selected some recipes. We have been reconstructing them in our labs, and we are trying to compare the results with historical tiles, and the idea is to get to to obtain the recipe or to obtain a color or a pigment which is similar in composition and also in the shade of the original tiles. This is a process that is sometimes called reverse engineering, because we have to go backwards in the process, and this is through trial and error. So we are testing and also learning with our experiments. So we started to reproduce 4 historical recipes from different sources. We tested different temperatures to find out that the higher the temperature, the stronger the color. So we can see in this image that the powders here have a stronger color than the ones here. So this was by testing the temperature. We also tested variants with tin and zinc, because this is extremely important for our yellows, because zinc is especially rare, or if I can say this, it's probably, I think that the Naples yellow with zinc was only identified in 1 case outside the Iberian Peninsula. So we know that it was used in tiles in Spain and in Portugal. We know that there are some Maiolic in Italy, some Maiolic objects in Italy with this type of variants. But other than that, we don't know. But we are still looking, because one important aspect of this project as well is to compare with foreign productions, so that we understand how the technology evolved and how the knowledge transfer took place until arriving and developing in Portugal. So we tested variants with tin and also with zinc. And with tin, we always have these lighter yellows that we see often in 16th century productions, and rarely after that. We also tested just firing the pigment once and firing the pigment twice, because we also see that in some recipes, and we see that the color is more intense when we fire the pigment twice. And here with the experiments with the zinc, we always see that adding zinc will result in stronger yellows, and sometimes they almost look like orange and not specifically yellow. So by now we also have a grasp of some minor compounds that influence the final color as well. And also that both the temperature and the number of firings are fundamental parameters to take into account. Surprisingly, these tests that we are now making by applying and firing the pigments on sample tiles are showing us that the differences that are so obvious in the powders somehow became less apparent in the final tile. And this is a work in progress. We are also now testing manganese and iron, and also we'll start with cobalt. We have 2 more years ahead of us, and we have a lot more questions than answers by now, as I said in the beginning. So we would love to answer all your questions and discuss all this work with you today. And also, if you want to keep up with everything that we are doing, please follow us on social media, and I'll give you here and I'll share. Well, thank you very much for your attention. So if anyone has questions. Yes, yes, Marcia answered. Yeah, because the copper is not opaque, like Marcia answered. And when we have the yellow, the yellow pigment is completely opaque and the others are not. So when they were mixing with other compounds with yellow, it's always a different, it's a different texture that we see on the tiles. We have here another question. Can you talk a little about the diseases of the workers that work with these colors? I don't know of descriptions regarding the Portuguese workers, but there are descriptions and also images. That image that we saw, that engraving with the roasting of the cobalt ore. I don't know if you noticed, but the workers had masks on, so they knew that cobalt was highly poisonous. And also we can find some descriptions and some instructions in the treatises regarding the problems that some compounds can give to the workers, but other times they don't say anything like that. And for instance, in Pico Passo's treatise, he tells people to be aware that, for instance, when one compound that is used on the white glaze as a flux is wine lees, so they burn wine lees, and he tells us that that has to be done outside the city because of the strong smell, and that's very dangerous. But in the same document, they are using lead and tin to make the white glaze, and he says that to know that the powder is really good and that everything is well grinded, they ground with water, and so the worker had to insert his hand and arm in the mixture, and it was completely it was good when the arm and hand came out completely white. So we are talking about tin and lead, lots of lead. So they had some concerns, but for other things, strangely, not so much. So it's interesting it's a very interesting question. It's a very interesting subject to study as well. I'm trying to see here more questions. The absence of written info in Portuguese be connected to secrecy and oral tradition. Yes, yes, it not only for tiles, but for art, technology in general. There were a lot of secrets, and even some treatises that we know today, they have some explanations, some debate, they are justifying that they are writing because it's important for people to know, but often people who are writing are not the people that are producing what I mean is that their income is not dependent on these secrets. But we also have lots of recipe books that fortunately were saved, and actually from families that worked with maiolica. And so we know the recipes, but there are always secrets that they don't write. Another thing is that some recipes are written and copied by people who don't actually understand them. So sometimes there are errors. At Vicart, we also see that a lot with glass, treatises on glass and glass recipes. So it's I actually find this really interesting because we are trying to unveil the secrets, and we are trying to make the recipes, and there are always informations that we need to discover for ourselves and to test and to try to find out. Yeah. So for Portuguese, unfortunately, we don't have many information, and that's one of the main reasons that we wanted to create this project. What kind of glaze did you use for the samples, or if you tried the different glazes? We tried different glazes, and then we are using one that the one that worked better. We know the recipe. We were using both chemical compounds, laboratory chemical compounds, and we also tried some industrial glazes, commercial glazes. And then what we decided to use in the end is a mixture that we also have information on the chemical compositions because we have analysis of the glaze, so we know that is a composition that is similar to an original white glaze, an historical white glaze. Is there influence from the Chinese? Yes, the cobalt blue, the tradition of painting in blue and white. It is usually said that this was a Chinese influence right in the beginning, with Islamic pottery, because they were influenced. The Islamic potters had the good cobalt blue, which the Chinese also used for their porcelain, but the tradition of painting in blue and white was mostly influenced by the Chinese. And also when we talk about our blue and white period, it was really influenced by the Chinese porcelain, which was coming to Europe by that time. And faience was also being produced. Faience objects were already being produced in blue and white. And then there was a time where Delft tiles were actually being imported to Portugal, and they were only blue and white. And then we started to produce blue and white as well. So everything, we always have that influence. I haven't investigated other earlier civilizations. I'm always interested in looking and reading papers that are published on these subjects. Before studying these tiles, Maiolica tiles, at Vicart, we also studied Hispano-Moresque tiles, which are a little bit different. And I'm always interested in reading things on the technology of the Islamic ceramics, because it's the beginning of this technology, in fact. So not Babylon, although A very interesting thing regarding the yellow pigment that we know was that it was used as early as in Egypt civilization. So we know that there was Naples yellow. Probably the beginning of the use of Naples yellow was in Egypt. So we have to go back regarding the Naples yellow pigment. But other than that, no, lapis lazuli wasn't used in our tiles. We only have cobalt. Yeah, and that's it. So even the difference in the chemical composition of the blue is not quite. There is a lot of research, but there is also a lot of questions regarding the sources of the earlier productions. Another question: have you found any discoveries that contradict what is usually accepted for the use of colors in Portuguese tiles? No, not contradict. I don't think so. Not yet, at least. The colors, the chemical composition, the base chemical composition is pretty straightforward. So we know the basic compositions, but what we want to do is try to understand the small differences that can give us clues regarding chronologies, workshops, production places. That's really important. So we need to use information from different analysis and also from historical research. So there's nothing at this point that contradicts anything. We're just adding information. There is some information, not so much on the colors. So we are trying to build on that as well. But at this point, we feel that we are adding information, not contradicting anything so far. I heard the firing cycles for the Portuguese tiles are at the time were quite long, and that this might have an effect on the colors. We know that for now, we know that this affects the yellow, and we haven't tested with longer firing cycles yet. So we know that the temperature affects the intensity of the color. Other thing that may influence is we can see that especially with the green, the copper green, because in many historical tiles, when using green, we see that it spreads, but more than that, we see lots of bubbles, and that wouldn't be a desired effect. So they had to get to a firing cycle that was appropriate for every color. So it needs to melt, not to melt, but it needs to be hot enough to result in a good yellow color in the end, because it's very important for the yellow color, because it stays on the surface, to be to have a good finish and to be shiny and not to be opaque. But also the temperature must be regulated so that the copper doesn't act so much as a flux. Otherwise, results, that those bubbles and spreading, and so we are testing color by color by now, and then only in the end we will test with all the colors. So it has an effect for sure. And by now we know more about the yellows than the other colors, but that's something that we will be testing as well. Also another question, is your intention to extend the project to the 19th and 20th century types? Well, we would love to do that. For sure. For now, it's this project for now, and for these 3 years is until the end of the master's cycle. Although we are considering some colors after that. We are considering colors because of the when we have the color palettes, reintroducing new colors after the master cycle. Those colors are important to compare with the previous ones, like the yellow, the manganese is especially important, also the use of the green. So we are considering some colors after that, but the main focus of the project are like about 200 years from the end of from the second half of the 16th century to the second half of the 18th century. That's the main idea. And
I would just
yes.
like to add that from this late 19th century to 20th century, beginning of 20th century, we had the introduction, at least in the gloss production, of some new elements like chromium, for example, and then later cadmium, that don't exist in the color palette that we are studying. So we would have different oranges, different reds, definitely, and even the greens that we obtain. So that would be, so we are expecting, we would be expecting different results from that period. But again, even in the historical written sources, there's also evolutions in this written sources that become more industrial than this recipes book. So it's a different story that we may be able to tell after this in a follow-up of the current project.
I think this would be a follow-up of this project, a new project, something like that, because it starts to complicate a little bit, but also extremely interesting. So yes, that's something that we are, of course, very interested in doing after that, after this project. Another question, since so much of this knowledge was secret, was the color production more alchemical than chemical?
I don't know, maybe Humberto, who is more
Humberto, I think,
focused on the history of science. Make a comment on this. Sorry, Humberto, to put it on you.
No problem. Thank you. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, perfectly.
I don't think we can really make this kind of a difference for the period we are working with, alchemical and chemical, because the secrecy, I think, in this case was much more related to financial reasons, if more than anything else. Also, we have knowledge that was kind of public, or anyway written down in the treatises, not from Portugal, but from other places. And at least in this period, in the Renaissance, 16th, 17th century, any chemical technology is also a little bit alchemical, because it involves the transformation of materials, and especially with colors, this is very, the boundaries are very blurred. So, so no, I think it's has more to do with the fact that it was important on a financial level or an economic level, any city. But also, I think in the case of Portugal, maybe it's just that we were not lucky enough to get the sources, or there was less circulating anyway. But I don't know the extent of the secrecy.
Yes, because one thing that Susanna also didn't discuss in the presentation that we prepared here, but it plays a big role in this period, is that a lot of, so it's a secret in the sense of it's not written sometimes, but there was a lot of tacit and implicit knowledge that was being transferred between the different workshops, and so it's an apprentice master also knowledge transfer that was in this period. Of course, each individual workshop, as Humberto was describing, was interesting in having their own color signature. This is maybe one reason why we have the different blues, that they could be distinguished. And of course, they didn't want to be copied. So it was something that it would have to be just for a more private group of people. So in order but again, a lot of questions that we also want to connect to what was happening here in the maybe this line of research, the history of science, and how was this knowledge transfer also happening in this period and in this context of the tiles production.
There's no more questions. I will just put here the link of our project. You also have the links to the social media accounts to follow everything that we are doing. And thank you for these lovely comments in the chat. I would say that in our Instagram account is where we usually put the things that we are doing. Humberto is very good at keeping everyone informed and posting new things. So it would be better than the website. I don't think there's more questions. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and for showing interest in this subject that is so dear to us, and we will keep working and sharing everything that we're doing, hopefully to tell this new story, tell a different story of our Azulejo heritage.